first ever episode of the Tillian Thinker podcast. Thank you for tuning in with this particular episode. We will be recording these and posting these up every Friday and possibly even occasionally on either Wednesday or Tuesday, depending on how we decide to do the schedule. But, yep, this is the first ever episode. That was a little too quick there on the killing of the music, so who knows? We may try to work all that out. But yeah, this is the first episode. Before we get into the premise of the show and the topic, I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Tangle Colors, I believe is the name of the particular individual in question, for this particular artwork that was done here for the banner of the Tillian Thinker podcast. As you can see right there, it is a nice, very nicely drawn Cornelius Van Til sitting and reading one of the books from his library, and of course looking very excellent while doing so. Especially gotta like the deal there where it catches the hair. That's very reflective, I gotta say. But during like the early years, Van Til definitely had a good deal there. So, that being said, number one, these shows are going to usually be about 30 minutes long. That is the goal, to try to make it be summed up within 30 minutes. And along with that, we have it going over various different topics from the perspective of the presuppositional method of apologetics and theological framework. And with that, we are definitely approaching this from the notion that we have here with the Van Tillian Thinker. That being said, so we have the so just a little clarification as well before we get into the topic. When we say Van Tillian Thinker, we're definitely, of course, referring to presuppositional apologetics, but we also want to keep in mind here that some people, when they hear the term Van Tillian, they may think of or get some kind of notion that it is it's fully rooted in originally Van Til, and to some degree, yes, but there are other different kinds of Van Tillians out there. You have, for example, those of the Bonson type, such as myself. We have the Framian, so I am a Framian in that regard, as opposed to being one of Bonson. And then, of course, there's even those of the school of, or the field of Schaeffer, Francis Schaeffer, then a couple of others along the lines. And of course, there's even different forms of presuppositional apologetics. One of the more bigger rivalries in comparison to the method would be that of the Clarkians, or those who adhere to the method of Gordon Clark. But we are Van Tillians here, and I am going to be adhering to that, specifically from the perspective of Frame. So you may hear me quoting more Frame at times in terms of going back to some of these philosophical thinkers of the point. But that being said, let's go ahead and get into the topic. The topic is why I reject polytheism. Now, this one is an interesting notion here. Now, I want to talk about briefly why I believe it is a topic we need to talk about. The one thing I have noticed personally in my observations of the polytheistic community is that it is a growing number due to what I know of one particular thing, is that you definitely have this notion of people seeing what is described as fascism, not just specifically in general, but specifically here within the Western area within America. You will have, for example, especially after the election of Donald Trump, a lot of people don't like the what he's saying. I mean, I certainly was not a fan of some of the things that was said by him. He was certainly not really a saint by any standards. But from what I can observe, during that specific climate of aggravation and... Sorry about that, I had to move a chair there. Aggravation, hostility, and the just tensions that was already swelling up at this point, what you then have are ultimately people looking for, some sort of identity and some sort of thing that they can identify with that goes against what that kind of movement, and by movement I'm referring to that of which some of these newer Republican individuals, those of what is called the alt-right or whatever that kind of whole thing is, they want to find something against that. And what's one of these things that comes into mind with this would be that of the what they would call the heathen community or the polytheistic community, whichever usually goes about it, depends on who you have with it. But one of the things that comes across this is found in what is known as one of the sources of polytheistic, well, I mean, I don't know if you can really call it scriptures at that point, because if you do some research, you're going to come across some interesting things about what exactly these documents are and what their origin is, and then how they are then viewed from them. But one thing that comes in mind from those of the Norse polytheists, from the Havamal, which is essentially a collection of wisdom sayings attributed to Odin. One of the sayings comes from, I believe it's called the stanza 127 of the Havamal. When you see misdeeds, speak out against them and give your enemies no peace. So this is just a general statement, but it has eventually, from this specific one, given the notion of the idea of no frith with fascists. Is one saying that has come across, and it is rooted within an interpretation of the Havamal, as is noted here. So when you see the statement saying, when you see misdeeds, and you speak out against them. So obviously, if you see fascism, if you see injustice, well, you speak out against it. And specifically of the enemies, you do not give them any sense of peace. You don't give them peace. So no alliance, no being friendly, no mercy, no chances. You just give them no peace at all. So we have there within the Havamal, and that's again specifically addressing the Norse version of it. There's then the Greek version, but we'll get into details in probably another time. The one thing that I want to note is where I would stand with this in terms of the notion. Now, obviously, I would say yes, be against fascism, speak out against injustices if you see them. I affirm that. And I definitely was not really too much of a fan of Trump. I mean, that has been obvious from the times I've talked on my other shows before, and where my position stands and where I lie on this matter. But I do want to point this out. Under my observation of polytheism, because there was a time I had considered the notion during a moment where I was going through an emotional state within myself and having some self-doubts. It was during a very depressing moment in my life, and I had considered this as a potential option during that time of weakness. However, the more I started to observe and look into it, the more I came to the opinion, or rather just the ultimate conclusion itself eventually, that with polytheism, it ultimately cannot account consistently for some of the things we want to be against. And more importantly, sorry about that, folks. I'm getting a little bit of yawns here and there. I've taken some drinks to get myself awake a bit, but it seems that they have failed me, so I will have to try something stronger next time to keep me up. That being said, so again, problem with being consistent in the defending of justification for why we are believing what we believe or why we are against what we are against. The other issue is about the possibility of knowledge regarding the specific religion that we adhere to. So, the religion of polytheism, if one claims to be the polytheist, then the one thing that I have noted from when I have observed and watched one individual by the name of Surus. No, not Surus. Dang it. Why am I having that problem of a name? It is already showing that I'm tired. Not Surus, but I do know that it is a good friend of him. Ocean Kiltoy. So he is a YouTuber who is getting some popularity on YouTube. He has about 32,000 subscribers. And he is probably, in my opinion, one of the go-to sources on some of these subjects. In fact, one of the things I was looking into was a couple of things that he stated about the Havamal, trying to explain it, some introductory books to Norse heathenry, and then, of course, his argument, which we may eventually touch on a future episode, which is the interpretation argument against Christianity. So give him a checkup if you'd like to see some of these claims or some of the popular polytheistic YouTube content creators, because like I said, it is starting to grow in terms of this movement of this revival of polytheism, and he is one of those that is there, along with one person we have talked about before in a video a while back, with 5.81 thousand subscribers, Aliyah Kai. She's from the Greek perspective of polytheism. So you'll get those particular things when you go over some of these different elements there. And some people would think, these people are just trendy and they're just doing this to be edgy and all this kind of stuff. And I can understand that, and that could be true for some people. I know people that would like that. They would say they are polytheists or that they're heathens, and they like wear some of like these attire and everything like that. But they would like just say, this is just for fashion. This is for letting out aggression. Just some people that follow the Norse in that particular thing that I've encountered. Some of them, again, not all, some would say this is reason to have these axes that are dedicated to that, and then they're just gonna use them for their own purposes. And they would say usually that they don't actually legitimately believe in the existence of said deities of any sort. That it's just, again, for fashion and for being edgy. However, that's not the case with Aliyah Kai. That's not the case in particular with Ocean. And that's not the case for some of these other ones that come out. Another one being of I believe it's Wolf the Red or Red the Wolf. I forget. Again, it is a little much on the point where I am trying to gather myself and collect myself more properly. But yeah, I did just look it up. It is Wolf the Red. So another channel to check a look, because the other thing they do is he does motorcycle videos where he is going over the different stanzas of the Havamal, and it looks like it's an ongoing series that's currently up to the 22nd stanza. So worth taking a look into that. But that being said, so again, it's not just a simple thing of, okay, it's edgy, it's what we kind of do there. There are people that legitimately believe this stuff, so this shouldn't just be discredited as some kind of simple phase, but rather these are people that have this belief. Some, not the ones that we have named, but others have actually written books about this, some of which even providing philosophical cases for the notion of it. Now, obviously, we as the Christian do not believe this because of where we stand upon Scripture. Obviously, the Scriptures teach that there is one God. This is the teaching of Deuteronomy 6:4. We see elsewhere within the Corinthians that Paul teaches a similar notion. Jesus likewise affirms that there is only one God. So we believe in monotheism as Christians, but there is a different perspective called polytheism, and this is the view that rejects what the Bible says. This is a view that is the differing starting point in a worldview that is antithetical to the Christian perspective, to the Christian view. And so they are competing points of worldviews at this point regarding that which is between Christianity and that which is between polytheism. So between the two, there is conflict, obviously. Main fundamental one is the idea of the existence of the gods. Is it just a simply monotheistic God, or is it a plurality of these particular gods? Now, I have mentioned some issues earlier, like I stated. And we're going to get into a bit of those in more detail because that is, after all, what you would try to tune in and expect out of this episode today. So, on a first case-by-case basis, number one, let's start with the possibility of knowledge regarding this. There really isn't much material out there in terms of what could be considered the scriptures of heathenry or polytheism, for that matter. One thing that I have learned during my time examining some of this stuff is that you will come across what can usually be described as a Reconstructionist. Now, Reconstructionists are one particular perspective in the matter in which they are trying to reconstruct the faith based upon sources that they can gain through historical research, and as a result kind of construct together what would likely be that particular perspective of the faith in that manner. In fact, actually, to help kind of get more into explaining this, we're going to play one of the videos that helps explain these kind of distinctions between the eclectic and the Reconstructionists from Ocean. So it's going to get the video playing on this. So you're going to hear a bit of an audio perspective on it. So what we're going to try to see here is we're going to get to, again, and we might as well start from the beginning with these two because, again, we're not just going to talk about Reconstructionists, but we're trying to at least give a summary of what it is, especially from some of the YouTubers that are out. So this is from Ocean Kill Toys. Eclectic paganism versus Reconstructionism. Which one is better? So let's see what we have starting from here.
Good. So let's start with eclecticism. Eclecticism has a few perspectives within it, but there are two main through lines. One is that it pulls from several spiritual traditions all over the world and isn't really committed to one specific cultural or religious tradition. Another is that it is rooted in the experience of the practitioner, that spirituality is a personal path, and that experience guides you on your journey. But it needs to be noted that experience often isn't dependable. There's an element of doubt in ourselves that both approaches face. But eclectics especially can feel the weight of that doubt when their practices are grounded largely in personal experience. And importantly, experience alone can lead to wrong conclusions.
So I do want to point out before we continue that there's one thing where I think, as pointed out, there can be a problem with that particular perspective if essentially it is rooted within the notion of what is personal experience, because as he noted, sometimes it's not always as dependable at that point. And I would agree, and hence why I would say we ultimately need a ultimate foundation in which we can then measure and help better understand these experiences, because from my point of view, we should, as we engage in understanding these perspectives, like I'm a tri-perspectivalist. I have affirmed that we need to have normative standard of one perspective. We need a situational perspective, that is that perspective which examines the facts and the data and the history and the science, all these kinds of things. And then there is that of the existential perspective. That is that we are observing something based upon our experience that we have, intelligible human experience. But however, what can be the measure to provide the notion that we have intelligible human experience and that our experience is reliable and thus decent enough in determining reality at that point? That would be my deal, and hence why I would say that we need to not just go by that one perspective, but we need these other two to keep our worldview in check, and that it remains consistent as a result of that. And I think that's one of the problems that can be noted there that I think Ocean kind of lays out briefly. So just keep that in mind when dealing with the notion of eclectic paganism.
Our experiences are not always exactly what they seem to be. And honestly, any pagan, not just eclectics, should be aware that the danger of divine experiences lies not in the experience itself, but in the interpretation. Developing discernment is its own beast. Reconstructionism shifts that grounding away from experience and roots itself in historical research and scholarship, though experience is still a huge part of the equation. The intention also shifts, where instead of personalized exploration of spirituality, Reconstructionism aspires to rebuild an ancient tradition in the modern world with what information we have. The underlying justification being if ancient peoples were connected to the gods, rebuilding those traditions to the best of our ability allows us to connect to the gods as well. Therefore, history has primacy in validating our spiritual quest. Now, leaning on history and the weight of scholarship can give a sense of security that appears to alleviate the doubts eclectics face. However, that security can become an illusion of certainty. Any study of history is going to carry with it the bias of the historian and the reader doing the research. And our historical sources themselves carry biases of their own, both written and in terms of what archaeological evidence we have available for the study, which can create an incomplete picture. As such, historical scholarship cannot grant certainty. A discovery tomorrow could overturn decades of consensus, and has. It's part of the game. So that uncertainty is still there, and will always be there.
So we have that from the explanation of the two. If you want to go see the full video yourself, you're more than welcome to. It is going to. I'm gonna see if I can try to link it in the page with what time I can do of the posting of this. If not, is check out Ocean Kiltoy's video, Eclectic Paganism versus Reconstructionism. Which one is better? So that's the title there. So we have those explanations there. Now again, I would at this point, if you were to point out between the two which one I would go for, that would be considered the better one, I would say Reconstructionism would have a much more stronger field in the door versus the eclectic paganism. I think that with Reconstructionism, you're trying to at least deal with the facts and trying to do your best to then build a good understanding of it, versus what could just be having your own personal experiences, and therefore they can become problematic in defining the faith at that point for you. So, for example, like you could have someone that claims that they received a vision from Odin, or they received a vision from someone of a specific realm, and told them that they needed to do this and that this would happen. It can be something as mild as trying to sell your house, to something as extreme as shooting up a bunch of people. That is two notions of what could have been said if someone were to say have those particular kinds of experiences. How then would they say, okay, was this actually from Odin or some other deity? Was this actually from Zeus or some other deity? How do we make this distinction? How can we know? Well, here's the thing about that. That's why I would say that ultimately you need to have a consistent source, and hence why Reconstructionists at least are trying their best to get involved with, building this faith based upon what they can examine historically of the different texts that can be had, or just historical research about what we are observing in archaeology and all these other different kinds of things about the faith. However, one of the issues comes up. The issue being that with, as he mentioned, there are sources that, and from what I gathered is that usually a lot of these sources, like the Havamal that was mentioned earlier, and a couple of others, seem to mostly have roots in the fact that they were from Christian scribes of some sort, and thus not able to be fully understood as being from the original people, but rather that these are just something where interference could play in at that point regarding the manner. And if that is the case, and if that's the reason we should be skeptical about it on certain elements, then I don't know, like, where we can really go from there. And most importantly, where we can try to decide or understand which one has been part of this influenced distortion, if you will, of the text. But yeah, so this basically gets it almost impossible to try to understand the original source material, and understanding how we then know of these gods and the experience that we can have in knowing that they are real and all of that stuff and their interactions with creation. Now we're almost reaching up the mark, so we're going to wrap this up quickly here. I want to at least provide one thing, because Timothy McCobb has written an interesting argument, and I think people should give it a listen to on the matter. Hopefully we can examine this stuff out more in later episodes, but I will just go over this right now. So this is what he's calling the argument from reason that demonstrates polytheism is deductively false. Premise 1. If anyone is not the author of every aspect of creation, then his authority is insufficient to rationally guarantee the behavior of creation. Premise 2. Under polytheism, no one is the author of every aspect of creation, and this is certainly the case. Conclusion. Therefore, under polytheism, no one has the authority to rationally guarantee the behavior of creation. So this is one where we have that notion of that the polytheistic system is reduced to some problems. And then there's the idea of ultimate absoluteness in the authority of the gods that is mentioned. From what I have gathered from one philosopher, John Frame, in his examination of it, ultimately argues that the only thing that seems to be of a control at this point that is ultimate is fate, with specifically the Greek polytheistic notions. So you have fate that is something that is decreed, bound to happen, and unchangeable. And because of what the description of this fate is, it is ultimately an impersonal absolute. So it is an absolute, but it is impersonal, and hence why it can lead to problems ultimately, as it is not too much of an interactive thing. And hence makes us wonder if fate is one thing we should submit to, or is fate something we should avoid and battle and fight against? Because even in some of the notions of the Greek polytheistic ideas and worldviews, some of these people wrestled with fate as if it was a virtue. But if it's something that is absolute and is something that is like going to be bound to happen, is it really virtuous to wrestle against fate, to try to defy and redefine your fate and your end? So there's a lot of things that came upon me whenever I was doing some research, and ultimately what I see is that it is an absurd worldview that does not ultimately guarantee much truth or consistency, that indeed ultimately gets reduced to subjective feelings on the matter, and that ultimately not too assured of the origins of the view that one holds to, and then it's ultimately down to subjective personal experience, which can at that point lead to ethics being subjective. And this leads to problems, especially if we want to say, for example, with why it became trending, why is racism bad? Why is fascism bad? I can certainly say why from an objective universal moral standard at that point. But to the person, they can only say, who adheres to these notions and will say, oh, it's polytheistic, and this, and some, because I believe even Ocean did kind of adhere to a sort of subjective mindset of ethics, would say that evil is subjective, and at that point, with that, racism is evil in my opinion, not ultimately. And that would be where I would stand as a problem with on that. So we have to consider the fact that with these notions, there's going to be problems, but again, I would suggest everyone to look more into this, and we may touch on future episodes with this topic if need be. But until then, this is all the time we have left of the Van Tillian Thinker podcast. Y'all enjoy yourselves, and God bless.